Painting in 17th century Italy followed one of two principal paths. It was either based on the classicism of the Carracci or the brutal naturalism of Caravaggio. And Rome was really the center of the art world during this time, or at least the Italian art world anyway. You have a video that's going to talk specifically about the Farnese ceiling, which was done by the Carracci. But I just wanted to point out that the Carracci reevaluated the high Renaissance style. They rejected the Mannerist style and they fused their northern roots with Central Italian Renaissance insistence on line, also compositional structure, and especially solid figures. They were looking towards artists like Raphael and Michelangelo and the classical sculptural models to depict ideal figural types. But it did kind of have a little dramatic flair in it. The Carracci placed a high value on accurate drawing, complex figural compositions, complicated narratives, and technical expertise. You can see that this one was obviously influenced by Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel ceiling, but of course it's an entirely different subject matter. Here we have mythological scenes instead of religious scenes. So the Farnese ceiling done by the Carracci is considered the best example of Baroque classicism. It departs from the High Renaissance. Remember, Michelangelo uses cool illumination and intellectual detachment, and this has a warmer light to it, kind of a warm glow to it. And it's more like the Venetian painters. It uses color more like Titian and Veronese. The Farnese family is also actually really influential to art. So this is the people who were the patrons of this artwork. So the Farnese family let tons of young artists visit their palace and sketch the figures that were on the ceilings. And so the ceiling was very influential on artists well into the 17th century. So the other trend of Baroque art was introduced by Caravaggio. And Caravaggio is actually contemporary with the Carracci. He introduced a powerful new naturalism in painting. Caravaggio was trained outside of Lombardy in northern Italy, and he actually really picked up on the Lombard painters' interest in realistic art with careful drawing and an interest in still life. So his work really reflects the Lombard painters' interest in still life and also their interest in intense naturalism or realistic depictions of objects and figures. He uses a technique called chiaroscuro or tenebrism, which is a technique of using light and shadow and often artificially illuminating areas of a painting to create a dramatic contrast. This is going to be used to heighten the realism of the moment and to make more drama in his paintings. Now, Caravaggio was actually pretty famous during his own lifetime, or rather maybe we should say notorious. He got a lot of commissions, but he was very much a character. He was very intense. He is known to have dwelled at the worst sort of taverns. He walked around the city with a sword at his side, but he also had a servant who walked around with him. So in case Caravaggio picked a fight that he really couldn't handle, his basically like servant / bodyguard would be able to help him out. Now his antics ranged from promiscuous rendezvous with women and men, tavern fights, destroying paintings when patrons suggested revisions, and murder. He arrived in Rome in 1592 after spending some time in Milan, and he worked in another artist's workshop. He worked there as a specialized painter of fruit and vegetables. Then he began to paint on his own. When he first started painting on his own, he painted a lot of still lifes, and then he moved on to still life with figures. These works boosted his reputation, and an art agent offered to market his pictures for him in the free market. This is one of his earliest works. This is Bacchus. We can see that attention to still life here with the fruit and the wine and the pitcher over here. Now this figure, he does add a figure, so it's like still life and then he adds a figure to it. But the way that he presents the figure, it's almost like the figure is a part of the still life. The way he studies him, it's like as if he is a still life. So the figure is not a classical figure that we're used to looking at, one from the Renaissance or Baroque classicism or from the classic period. Instead, he has a boy's body. In addition, like I mentioned, Caravaggio is kind of interested in studying this guy like he is a still life, so he pays attention to every single detail. So the boy, who is supposedly playing this role of Bacchus, and Bacchus is the god of wine, he has a white body, and then you can see that his face and his hands are sun-touched or sunburned. Now, one of the things that Caravaggio prided himself on is that he claimed to paint from real life. So he would actually have a model come in and he would paint him or her as that model sat there. This is unusual because before Caravaggio, artists spent hours sketching and studying, and mostly they were looking at other artists' works. So like Michelangelo would go into go to look at Masaccio's tribute money, and he would study the figures of that. And then he would make sketches, and then he would use those sketches in his own artwork. So that's kind of how artists worked before this time. But Caravaggio is actually painting from real life. Now the Carracci actually did this too. They also had live models, but I think they did a lot of sketches and then of the live models, and then they would produce their art. But Caravaggio claims that he would have a model come in, sit down, and he would paint them. And another marked difference between Caravaggio's approach and the Carracci's approach to these live models is that the Carracci would idealize the figures. Caravaggio would not. He would paint what he saw. So this is an important innovation, that he would paint directly on the canvas. He used a sharp point or the end of the brush to sketch out his figure, and then he painted what he saw. So he's literally painting right in front of him, which is actually one of the reasons that he gets criticized, is they say, oh, you're not being an artist. You're not making any changes to what you see in front of you. You're depicting exactly what you see. Whereas the Carracci would add a little bit of flair to it by making it idealized. So Caravaggio is literally painting what he sees in front of him. His figures or his models are often just people from off the street, so they will have dirty fingernails, they'll be sunburned like this guy, or they'll have tattered clothes. This gives his paintings the appearance of immediacy. It also allows him to paint his figures more realistically. We can actually see, here's a close-up where we can see actually that dirt under the fingernails of this model. And then the fruit in the basket is rotting. So he is literally painting what he sees. He's not idealizing life. Instead, he's trying to depict it as realistically as possible. Now, the character that's playing Bacchus is looking at us. Oh, here's a little bit better. You can really see that those dirty fingernails there. So the character of Bacchus is looking at us, and he is addressing the viewer with sort of blurred eyes, as if he's drunk, which kind of makes sense since he is playing Bacchus. He is offering the viewer a glass of wine, and some people think that this is an allegory of the sins of lust and gluttony. Others say it's just a street tough playing the role of Bacchus. But this degree of naturalism, having these dirty fingernails, and having this boy body with sunburnt on him, really offended some people, as did Caravaggio's kind of crazy personality. So many people are often outraged by his work or offended by his work. In his early work, he paints still lifes or scenes of low lives, city dwellers, fortune tellers, gypsies, and card sharks. He uses city dwellers or common people to play the roles of mythological figures, like we see here, or musicians. The figures tend to be large and brightly lit in a shallow picture plane, just like we're seeing here. After 1600, most of the commissions that he gets are religious. Reactions are kind of mixed to his religious commissions. Sometimes patrons reject his work, calling it too brutal or too naturalistic and unsuitable for religious subjects' dignity. They also criticize him for that lack of genius that I mentioned earlier, because he's merely painting what is in front of him. Now, he really was an innovator who reintroduced realism or extreme naturalism into art and developed dramatic lighting effects. Here's an example of one of his religious commissions. This is the Entombment, and it's from 1603 to 1604. Here we can see that he does incorporate viewer participation into his artwork. He did that with the Bacchus as well, as the Bacchus is offering us a glass of wine. But here we are in the viewer is in the perspective as if Christ's body is going to be handed to the viewer. So we would actually be standing right here, and it would kind of look like that these people are going to hand us Christ. So the viewer stands in this burial pit in the chapel where this is hung, and so it will be right above the altar. So the body is almost off balance, indicating movement by the way that the men are holding the body. So really, it's going to be as if he's going to tumble into our arms. So you almost walk up to it and put your arms out, ready to catch him. The figures are large. They're this kind of off-centered triangle, a little bit there. And the figures are pushed towards the foreground, which is kind of one of his calling cards. Almost off the stone slab that they are all standing on. He does use extreme tenebrism here, or chiaroscuro, so you can see that we have this kind of theatrical, almost spotlighting on the scene. Look at this person kind of fading into the darkness, and of course we have complete darkness behind these figures. So it's as if these figures are merging into the spotlight and everything else is fading into the darkness. So it creates a sense of being on stage, or theatricality. A sense of realism. The light is mostly focused on Christ's body. He's still using common people here, and in this case they're going to play religious characters, which does offend some people. Now, some artists really liked Caravaggio's style, and perhaps they were hoping to become one of his students. But because Caravaggio had such a crazy personality, he never had any students. In the last decade of his life, he was frequently arrested, mostly for minor offenses like street brawling and things like that. But in 1606, he killed a man in a fight over a tennis match. So he flees from Rome, and he finds work in Naples and then later in Malta. In Malta, he is imprisoned for insulting one of the knights of Malta, but he escapes. He flees again. He's chased by one of the upset knight's agents, and they find him in Naples in 1610, and they severely wound him. He recovers and he moves north, but he ends up dying of a fever before his 39th birthday. Before he dies, he is waiting for a pardon from the Pope for this murder over the tennis match. He actually does receive a pardon, but he never knows this because he dies from a fever a few days before the news could reach him. So like I said, due to his personality, Caravaggio never had any real students like the Carracci did, but he did have followers, and these were mostly artists who studied his paintings and used that tenebrism or chiaroscuro in their own work. These artists are often referred to as the Caravaggisti. And one of the most famous ones, is Artemisia Gentileschi.